All right. Welcome everyone to session 7 of learn.py. This is going to be web development part 2. My name is Jody. I will be presenting the first half of this workshop. I also taught the file and IO portion of one of the workshops previously as well. And then we also have our other presenter. Tim, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm going to be teaching kind of the database portion of our workshop today. And I did web scraping just a few weeks ago. So.
Yep, so we got a fun workshop for you guys planned today. And that's about it. So let's just dive straight into this. So here are the links to the slides as always, and the link to the README. The README will actually have some valuable information in terms of the demo that we're doing today. So I will actually do a walkthrough of that as well before we completely dive into our code demo. And I see that Einar has dropped those links in the chat. Thank you very much. All right, today's portal attendance code is save the bees. And fill out our feedback form either during the break or after the workshop. We really value your feedback as always. We actually do go through it as a group, and we try anything suggestions that we get, we try and improve upon that. So thank you for those who have filled out the feedback form, and for those who will continue to fill them out, thank you in advance. Also, there's some like money involved. Don't really know about that, but yeah. All right, so where are we in learn.py session 7? Originally, the schedule said web APIs, and we were thinking of putting together a sort of web API workshop version of this, but after Tim and I went through our demo together, we realized it's not so much of an API as it is just more in-depth stuff about Django. So we're deciding to rename this Web Dev Part 2. I'm really sorry if you came in thinking that this is web APIs. I apologize. All right. All right, so today's plan, part 1, we're going to start with a recap of last week's material, and then Django project structure, templates. If you don't know what that is, that's okay. We'll go over it. And then part 2, we'll also be going into some data models within Django itself. And then Tim will be doing this fun connecting it all part where he connects everything that we've learned about Django together. And so for this recap, I will say that if you have not attended last week's workshop, this will be building off of the material that we did then, so I won't be explaining too much of that. However, if you did not, it's okay. We are actually teaching some new conceptual things today. So if you're like, oh no, am I going to be able to keep up? The answer is yes. Some of the setup stuff might be kind of confusing, but that's okay. You will be able to learn the new material. That stuff is a little separate. All right, that's today's plan. So just as a reminder, this slide is just here for reference. If you want to download Python and follow along, this is how you do that. I'm not going to spend too long on this because this is just here for reference. And then also what you'll need for today is Django installed. So these are instructions to install Django. And yeah, that'll be about it. Okay, so note on a code along today. So if coding along is your style and you want to code along today, we highly encourage you to do so. However, there's this big Comic Sans, but if you fall behind, that's okay. My suggestion would be to stop coding and stop debugging and just sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. That is because if you fall behind, it'll be kind of hard to catch up. And if you start debugging, you might miss what is coming up next. And that's kind of hard to do. In the past, when we did workshops in person, we used to have mentors that went around and helped out, but it's a little hard to do that over Zoom. So we won't be doing that today. So, and if you don't want to code along, that is also okay. I personally am not a fan of coding along, just my learning style. I just like watching and absorbing and then trying things out later. That is also perfectly fine as well. Yes, so just keep that in mind for today's code along. And as always, if you want to ask me a question, ask Tim a question, please drop it in the chat below, or you can unmute and ask. We will do our best to answer it. If it's in the chat, one of the mentors will hopefully get to it before I do. And if they don't, then I'll also just pause and answer the question. And this workshop is pretty demo heavy in terms of we're going to be teaching concepts through a project. So if you need me to repeat anything at any time or go back because you didn't quite catch it, or maybe I didn't explain it clearly enough, that's also okay. Just let me know. Perfectly valid question. All right. For those of you who don't know, this guy's name is Andre, and he is frequently on Bruin Walk. So that is sort of the theme of today's workshop. So before we dive in, last week on learn.py, we learned about Django. And yes, this is really their logo. I was trying to find like a nice graphic, but this is really their logo. It's just the word in green in font. Anyway, so what is Django? Django is a Python web development framework. What does that mean, or exactly what did we do with it last week as a quick recap? Well, we first built like a simple HTML page. This is the one that I actually built during the run through and the actual workshop as well. It is all about Eric. And then let's see, we learned that we can access this web page if we set it up with a Django project through this URL and this like /Eric endpoint. So what did Django do in this case? It helped us serve web pages. So we can ask for a specific page. It would give us that specific HTML page. And then we can access them from different endpoints. So different pages, different endpoints. So /Eric gives me this. Maybe if I did /Alex or something, it would give me a page about Alex. And a quick aside, I'm going to be using the word endpoint a lot. And if you're wondering what is an endpoint, I'll just go over it real quick. So if you go to like any website, for example, shameless plug, our hack website, you'll notice that the URL is just what, hack.uclaacm.com. And then, if I decide to navigate to this, oh, wow, look at this really cool team page where you can see the really cool officers that put together workshops. You'll see that the URL actually changes a bit. It's got the /team at the end. And then same with like the events page, it's got the /events archive /archive. So this is an endpoint. So whenever we want to access a different part of the website, in this case, it's a new page, we're going to append this /something. So this /something is known as an endpoint. All right. So if you hear me saying that a lot, that's just what that is. It's just whatever comes after, the base URL name. Okay. If there's any questions about that, please drop it in the chat. And I'm going to press forward. All right. All right, so that's essentially it for the recap. That's basically what we covered last week, and we also covered how to do it in code as well. So before we go into our code, I'm just going to break down what Django project structure is. So we saw what a project was last week. We actually coded one, but how are projects normally structured? How are they broken down? So Django projects are composed of apps. Now you're probably thinking, okay, it's composed of an app. Do you mean like a full-blown like mobile or web application, like a whole website? And that's actually not the case. In Django, apps are just an isolated component. So it's as it says here, isolated component that handles one part of the overall project. So I think the real keywords here are isolated component and then one part. So it's like a very isolated section. Oh, wow, I was doing so good on wording until now. Okay, let's just look at examples so you can see what this looks like. So let's suppose you're making a Django app that does UCLA stuff. So maybe you're making a cooler version of my UCLA, whatever. It's a project about UCLA. Okay, there's a lot of components about UCLA, right? So for example, housing is a big one. You have to manage like a housing page that talks about the dorms and keeps track of all the dorm stuff. And then we also have a classes page, which let's see. Oh, I'm getting a phone call. Let me ignore it. Okay, my bad. All right, so we have a classes page, which might handle, class enrollment and stuff. And then we also have a sports page. Sports is pretty big at UCLA, whether it's like football, gymnastics, whatever your sport is, that's another big one. And then we also have clubs. So clubs are pretty fire at UCLA. We are one of the many clubs here. And we're probably going to want some part of our project to manage that as well. So if we make our project, these would all be separate apps, and then each one would handle a different part of this, right? So the housing app would handle, perhaps who gets assigned what dorm. Classes is class enrollment. Sports, sports clubs, maybe the roster of clubs and how many people they have. And the reason why I keep saying that these are also going to be isolated is that each app itself rather not only just holds one thing and one overall functionality, but it's probably going to have its own data model, right? Housing will probably have data about the dorms and stuff. Like I said, clubs will be the roster, and those data models will also be separate, so they won't really interact with each other. And then I write usually here because this is true. Usually each app will have its own special URL path. Kind of like how we saw on on the Hack website, where each page has like its own endpoint. So like /housing, for example, would be used to access like whatever housing stuff or what the housing app, and then /classes or something. So that's like the overall idea of a Django project. So this is kind of important to keep in mind because when you start building bigger Django projects, you usually want to organize things by apps. All right, so this is just a slide for reference. We did this last week, but I'll just break it down real quick. Django admin start project my site. This is just the command to create a new Django project that is called my site. And then to actually run it, this is the command as well. This is just here for reference, so come back to it if you need it. And then adding an app to a Django project. So once you've created a Django project, you're going to run this command as well. And this creates an app within an existing project called my app. So this is just a name here. And if you're on Mac OS, important, I'm going to be running a lot of commands with Python today. That is because I'm on Windows. But if you're on Mac, all of your commands will start with Python 3. Okay. And then I also have this thing, register app under settings py. I'll get into that in the demo. This is just a reference slide if you need it later. Okay, so demo time. So thank you, Max. You're probably looking at this picture and going, oh, this is kind of a boring picture. Don't you, Jody, put like better pictures? No, yes, normally put better pictures, but it's because today's app is going to be all about Bruin Walk. So if you've never been to campus before, or you forgot what it feels like, this is just a picture of Bruin Walk. It's essentially the path that every student who lives in the dorms takes to get to their classes. And it's just this long path up a hill. And what's special about this path is, especially during fall quarter, is there will be like lines of people along each side of Bruin Walk. And what they're going to be doing is bombarding you with flyers. They'll be shoving flyers in your face and telling you to join their club. And a lot of like new students get really overwhelmed and they go, oh, okay, I'll take it. And then sometimes they start talking and that's okay. But it's like a very traumatic experience sometimes, especially when you don't want to be talked to and they come talk to you anyway. Yeah. And sometimes they'll like guilt trip you into taking your flyers too. They'll say things like, oh, would you like to join this culture club? Blah, blah, blah. The worst one I got hit with was, hi, do you want to help kids dying of cancer? And I was like, no, I have to go to class. So it was really sad. I mean, I would like to help them, but I didn't want to join their club, basically. That's really what that meant. I hope they took it that way. All right, so let's just get into what this looks like. And before we actually go into the code, I'm going to break down something. So if you go to the README, this is going to have the full, the full demo. And I actually have 3 demos pushed up here. So a lot of the stuff I'm going to be doing right now is just a lot of setup and review from last week. There's some new things, but I'll explain them. So if you're coding along and the setup is kind of hard because I'm going to be jumping around some files, then you can just download the README and work off of this demo first half. This is all just the setup of the project. Or not this first half, starter. Starter is all the setup. It has all that code that I'm about to do. And I will also let you know when I'm done with the starter portion. And then this demo first half contains all the demo that I'm going to do up until the break. So whatever I code before Tim starts, the finished version is right here. So if you want to hop in right when Tim's section comes, or you got lost in between and you just want a fresh start, that works. This code is where you're going to find it. And then finally, this demo is just like the full demo. So when Tim is done, this is his demo will basically be this one as well. So if you get lost at any point, but you still want to try code along or just look at the code locally, these are your 3 go-tos. Okay. And one more thing before we start, I'm also just going to show you what this project looks like, just because it is like pretty cool actually. So let me first pull it up. So like I said, we're going to be simulating what it is like to be on Bruinwalk. Okay, let's Python manage. I'm just typing this on my other screen, so don't worry about it too much. All right, so if I go to this URL, ignore this. I promise you it works. Yes, here we go. So it'll look like this. We'll basically simulate your virtual Bruinwalk right here. We got a list of all the flyer people on Bruinwalk. We got Leia and Connie here. And then, so you got their name, their pitch, you know, they got to hit you with that good pitch. And then if you click their name, you can see their name, their pitch again, and you can actually see the number of flyers they have given, how successful they have been at guilt tripping you today. And then you can actually, like, it says vote, but I guess it's like take flyer. You can take their flyer. And you can do it for each person as well. So if I go back and I go to Connie's, it'll take a flyer from her. So that's what we're building today. It's just a simple 2-page, get to take flyers from people, whatever. All right, so that's what it's going to look like. Let's actually get started. So I'm going to be going through a lot of setup. It might seem a little tedious. So like I said, it's okay if you just use this demo starter. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up Windows Terminal, or it'll be called Windows Terminal for me. You can use your terminal of choice. So PowerShell, if you're on Mac, the Mac terminal. I'm just going to go into my desktop and let's see. Oh, I have way too many folders here. Okay, so I'm just going to make a new one called learn.py session 7 session. Oh, wait, no, that's the wrong command. So I'm basically making this folder through the command line. If you want to do it by manually clicking, that is also fine. I'm just a fan of the command line. What can I say? All right, so I'm gonna go into this folder. All right, so this is a clean folder to work with. Oh my God. Oh no, this is the wrong folder. Hold on. That was the other workshop I taught. Subtle plug to that workshop if you want to learn about file IO and Chloe Ting. I did teach that. All right, so we're in this folder. This is okay. I just created this folder to be clean. All right, so I'm going to create a project. The command is Django admin start project, and I'm going to call this Bruinwalk. So we're creating our Bruinwalk experience. All right, so if I look, I have a folder called Bruinwalk here. So I'm going to open this in VS Code. So let me open a new window in VS Code. All right, here's a new window, and I'm just going to open that folder. So if I open folder, I saved it in my desktop. It's called session 7 session. Yes, I have done this many times if you cannot tell. All right, and our project is called Bruinwalk. So I'm going to open that folder. All right, so we're in this Bruinwalk folder, and quite immediately you can see that, yes, indeed, our command worked. We have another folder within our Bruinwalk folder called Bruinwalk. This contains a lot of the project stuff. And then we have manage.py. All right, pretty cool. So we have created the project, but now I want to create an app within it. So we said that projects are broken into apps. I'm going to create an app called Flyer. So the command for that is, first let me go into Bruinwalk. Okay, actually, I'm going to change out of this terminal into my Visual Studio Code terminal. Okay, so I'm going to run Python manage.py start app, and I'm going to call it Flyer. This app will handle all the flyering stuff. Okay, cool. And this seemed to work. If you're on Mac OS, recall Python should be Python 3. All right, so we can actually see that this has already worked. I have a new folder here called Flyer, and this app folder will contain all our app files. So we got this admin.py. We'll see what this does later. We've got this apps.py. It looks like it contains like a configuration and definition of what our app is. That's kind of cool. Models. Ooh, what is that? We'll actually use it later. Tests will also, actually, we're not going to use this one, but you can write tests here. And views, we're going to be using this later as well. Okay, and like I said, you can create like as many apps as you want for your project. So for example, I could make a new app called, there's like a poster sale once in a while in Broonwalk. It's pretty dope. You can create start app. You can create, what was I saying? All right, so you can have a poster app as well, and we can see a new folder that contains basically the same thing as this. You can create as many apps. But I'm just going to use Flyer today, so I'm going to delete this poster folder just because it's going to get messy. But no, you can do that, and I encourage you to do that later in your free time. All right. Okay, so let's get started. So if we recall on our website, we just had like 2 pages we were going through. It was just like a list of all the people page, and then we also had like a flyer page that showed more information about each person flyering and how many flyers they gave out. So let us begin making that. So within this flyer folder, I'm going to create a templates folder. All right, and then within this templates folder, this is going to contain the HTML files that I'll be using. So I'm going to make one called index.html. That's just going to be my like landing page, so to speak. It's going to just show all that list of things. I'm going to just put some simple HTML in this as well. Let's see. So start an HTML page. Gotta put a body, and within this, I'll just put an H1 tag that says list all flyer people. And then I'm just gonna put a description so we know what this is. Will hold list of all flyer people on Broonwalk. All right. And then we also had one more page, which was the actual flyer information page itself. So I'm going to make another one as well, another HTML file called flyer. Let's call it flyerinfo.html. It'll just hold more information about a flyer. So let's create this real quick. So this one, let's just say flyer person info. And then a description is information about the flyer person. All right, so we have created some basic HTML pages. I'm not really going to show them because it's just going to say the words with no styling. So it's kind of ugly, but it's okay. All right, so like we learned from last week, if we make an HTML file, in order to get it into our project and working, we are going to have to create a view for it. So within Flyer, this Flyer folder, I'm going to open views.py, and this is where I'm going to sort of render these HTML files. So I'm going to create functions for each of my pages. So this one is called index. It'll return the index file. This view will take in one parameter called request. This is also just a review from last week. And it'll return render request index.html. And then we're also going to make one for the flyer info page. So flyer info, let's put an underscore, info request, return render request flyer info.html. Okay, so we have created our views. And then in order to actually use these views, so these are functions, right? In order to call these functions and link them to a URL endpoint, we're going to have to modify our URLs file. So we don't actually have a URLs file within Flyer, this Flyer app. So I'm going to create one called urls.py. And it's going to be like essentially almost a copy pasta of this urls.py in this Broonwalk folder. So I'll explain what this does in a second, but for now I'm going to copy this over. Okay, so it's a little confusing. We have two urls.py. I'm copying the one from the Broonwalk folder into my Flyer app. So I'm going to do that. And let me also label at the top that this is the Flyer app one, just in case you get confused which one I'm typing in. So I don't need this admin line. Okay. So let's create the endpoints that I'm going to access this from. The index.html will just be an empty endpoint. So I want to call the view, which, let's import them. So from dot means just the folder that we're currently in, import views. So that is our views module right there. And at the empty path, I'm going to say views.index. It'll return that one. And I'm also going to give this a name. I'll explain what this name thing does in a second. And for this other one, for now, let's just give it a path of info. I will modify that in a little bit, but for now, info, views.flyer info, name equals flyer info. All right, so what is this name thing I've added? So this is something that we didn't see last workshop. Very similar to when you're programming normally. If you have some sort of value, you're obviously going to want to deal with it later over and over. You put it in a variable, and that variable has a name so that you can access that later. And so in Django, in order to name this path, so to speak, and save it in, or not save it, but let Django know that if I want to refer to it later, we're going to add on this index thing. So name index means that, hey, Django, I am going to name this path index. Later on, if I use the name index, I'm talking about this path at this endpoint. So same with this one, Flyer info will refer to this one as well. I'm also going to add one more line at the top, app name equals Flyer. This basically just says that this is sometimes called a namespace, but in order to access these names, we're going to assign it to a namespace, which is the same as our app called Flyer. And if you're like, what namespace, what is this? It basically just means, imagine I had multiple apps and for some reason I had multiple index files or index named paths. It's going to be hard. We have to tell Django which index we're referring to, right? I could have like 5 apps here and they all have this index view or this index path. I'm just going to tell Django that this little flyer will eventually help us differentiate which one we're talking about. For now, don't worry too much about it. We'll actually see how it's used in a bit later, but we're going to add that for now. Okay, so if we actually try to run this file right now, we're going to see that it doesn't work. So I'll just show you what I mean. So python.manage run server. How do you spell run server? So if I run this, we'll see these warnings. Like good programmers, you're going to ignore them. And then we have the link to actually see this. So mine is this 127.0 stuff. And we'll be like, cool, it seems to work, except like, where's our index file that we made? And we're like, okay, well, what about the info file? Oh, that also didn't work. And then you go, oh, but it's under the Flyer app. So maybe it's like flyer/. Oh, that still doesn't work. And then, oh, that's a textbook file. Don't look at that. Okay. And then, oh, this /info also doesn't work. And so we're looking at this and scratching our heads going, okay, wait, so why isn't it working? And if we look at the error message, we'll find something kind of useful. It says page not found, obviously. All right, using URL conf to find in bruinwalk.urls. Oh, bruinwalk.urls, that's like a folder and a file we have. Django tried these URL patterns in this order. Admin. And the current path didn't match any of these. Oh, okay, well, let's take a look. Let's take a look at this. So if I go back to VS Code and I go into the Bruinwalk folder and I say, oh, not I say, but I see there's a urls.py. Hey, there's this like admin thing. That's exactly what the 404 code was telling us. It was matching against admin and it didn't match anything else. And that is because this is it. Basically, Django has no idea of where our templates are, like these things, and the fact that we define URLs for them. So we actually have to tell Django that we are including more URLs. So it's only using this one right now, but we have to tell it, hey, we have like an app that also has its own like URL configurations. So we're going to do something else. I'm going to include this new function called include, and I will break down what it means in a moment. I'm just going to write it out though, and then let me write this. I will explain what this all means in a moment. Flyer.urls. Okay. Before I move on, let me actually explain what this include function is. It's so important. I actually made a slide on it. So let me jump back to my slides real quick. Hopping a little bit out of the code, but quite important. All right. So what is this include function that I just did? So for reference, recall I'm still in this Bruinwalk urls.py folder. So this include function, what does it do? So it allows references to other URL configurations. So before we're only looking at this one, but we want to, let me pull up my cursor. We want to be able to access the ones we defined in our app as well. So what this include function does is it chops off whatever matches and sends the rest to the included URL configuration for processing. So when I say whatever matches, if you type in an endpoint like /flyer, it'll say, oh, that matches this. And then whatever comes after, if you do /info, /empty string, it's going to take all of that and send it to this URL configuration. So we can see it says flyer, which corresponds to the flyer folder, .urls, which corresponds to this URL folder. So essentially what we're doing is we're saying, hey, Bruinwalk urls.py, I want you to take, after matching flyer, take whatever's left and throw it into this URLs configuration file, and then we'll work from there. So that's essentially what this is doing. Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, let me know in the chat or just ask. But yes, you can also reference this later. Okay, that was a mouthful. All right, so that is what this is doing. And you can even see that at the top, they also mention it in the comments. It says import include from this. We did that. Add URL to URL patterns. And what they're doing is also including like another app. In this case, I'm guessing their example is blog. But ours is flyer, so we're doing flyer. All right, and if we try this again, so the server's running. If we try this, it's still not going to work. Like, we can refresh this, and it still doesn't work. And you go, oh, you scammed us. And I totally did, because I did not include one crucial step, is we have to register this app in our project. So even though we created the app within the project, we didn't actually register it. We didn't tell our project that, hey, we've created this app, I want you to use it. So within this Bruinwalk folder, go to settings.py and scroll down and find this line called installed apps. We're going to include our app here. So it's going to be flyer.apps.flyerconfig. And if you're going, whoa, where did you get this line? How do you know to type this? So flyer refers to just this flyer folder. .apps is this .apps file, and flyer config. So I kind of showed it earlier, but let's just go again. Within this apps file, we have this flyer config class, which sort of defines our app. So flyer config, that is where that comes from. Okay, that was kind of a lot, but this is all the setup that was needed to connect our app to our project. So yes, one more time, settings.py, I just added this line. And at this point, if you were trying to code along or you're just trying to use one of the demos I put up, this is the end of that starter demo. So all of this code is the starter demo code. And now let's see if my program is running. All right. If I go look now, if I refresh, hey, look, it works. We got flyer person info. This is that flyer info page. If I get rid of info, we've listed all the flyer people on our index page. Awesome. And before I move on, I'm going to tweak one more thing as well. So our flyer info page right now is accessed through, let's take a look, info / like info, whatever. Later on, we're going to have unique flyer info pages for each people. So I actually want to reference it through number. So I'm going to change this to int flyer ID. Flyer ID is we'll just, assign each person a unique flyer ID, and that's how we'll access their flyer information. So if you recall from last week, in order to get this working, we also have to include it in our views. So if I go to views.py, I pass in flyer ID. I'm not going to do anything with it right now, but I have to pass it into the view. So now, flyer info, if I type in any integer, it should go to that page. So I've typed in 123. I could type in like 111. This would also work. Okay, that was kind of a lot, but this is just the setup that we had to go through. Okay, yay, we're on. We just finished the setup. Let's move on as well. If anyone has questions on the setup, please let me know. If not, we're going to move on to the fun parts of this project. Okay, oh my God, that was so much for the setup. It's okay. The sacrifices we make to make a dope project. You have to go set it up. All right. So the next question I want to pose to you guys is, how do we dynamically generate HTML? And you're probably going, wait, why do we care about this? So remember how I said the flyer information page will be different for each person? Well, how are we going to make it different for each person, right? We could like hard code each of their pages and put in each of their information. That's really tedious. So how do we sort of dynamically generate this? And if you're still going, if you're still scratching your head and going, I'm sorry, what does that mean still? So let's just look at a quick example. So recall this is what I made last week, this cool webpage about why Eric is cool. But let's suppose that I'm really not that great of a friend and I'm telling all my friends that they're the best. So I'm straight up lying to them. Let's say I'm making one for Alex as well. Okay, so it's literally the exact HTML page, but one is access through /Eric, one is access through /Alex. Don't tell them that both pages exist. They only know that theirs exists. But if we take a close look at this, it's basically identical except for a very few things. Like the name here is different, and then also the year. Even what they do, like why are they cool, is different. I'm just not that creative apparently. But look, it's basically the same. So if you're making this in HTML, you would know that, okay, well, we can just hard code a whole page here and then copy and paste the whole thing and make Alex's page as well. That you could do that. There's only 2 pages, but imagine you have to do like 100 of them. That's going to take some time. And then maybe your friends might start catching on that you're being fake because like you forget to accidentally change one of these names or something. So we want to prevent that. We want to keep friendships going. So right now you might be scratching your head going, okay, so if we're dynamically passing in these values into HTML, like we're dynamically changing this, maybe we need to declare a variable. So how do we declare a variable in HTML? And I'm going to save you the trouble. Just don't Google that. You can't. So there's no variables in HTML. The real answer is you could use JavaScript. Woo. Okay, but then you also realize that this is a valid JavaScript. So I'm going to let this sit. I just want you to stare at it for a few seconds. Okay, anyway, so you're looking at this and going, oh, do I really want to learn JavaScript? On a side note, though, the 2019 version of this workshop actually was done through JavaScript. So if you want to check that out, you can. It's actually pretty cool. But instead of asking yourself, okay, so now I have to learn JavaScript, how do we use JavaScript? You should really be asking yourself, how do we avoid JavaScript? All right. And the answer is Django templating. So we're moving on to like the next conceptual portion of our workshop. All right, so Django templates. What is a Django template? It's a way to dynamically generate HTML Django. So basically what I said before, how do we, keep like one HTML file and just pass in a few values here and there. So I'm gonna actually show you what that looks like just to the slides, and then we'll go through an example in the code. So Django template. So say we have a variable, right? Maybe I'm passing in some names and stuff. Oh, I see the chat blowing up with all this best stuff. Never mind. Okay. All right. So if you have an H1 tag and you want to change the title, you can just pass in your variable like this. Notice the syntax here. We're going to have 2 of these curly boys and then the variable name. And then you can also, put the variable anywhere as well. This is in a P tag next to some other text, but same syntax, 2 curly brackets, and then the variable name. All right. And so when this variable has a value, it's going to replace this whole thing. So you won't see any curly brackets in your resulting HTML code or what you see later. It'll replace like all of this text right here. All right, so that's variables. And then tags. So tags are like code that's not just a variable. Maybe it has some sort of function. Maybe it does something. So for example, we have the if tag. It looks just like an if statement in Python, right? If, elif, else. However, we have some curly bracket %sign. So that's the syntax for this. There's no colon at the end. We don't need the colon here. And we also have this closing tag. So a lot of tags, well, that we'll see will have an opening and a closing tag. And why is that? That's because there's a siren going on. I apologize. But indentation doesn't really matter. So in Python, we know that indentation matters. That's how you can tell what belongs to what block. But in templating, the indentation doesn't matter. So we need this end if tag to tell Django, okay, this if statement's over. And if we look at this, we'll see that if 3 is equal to 6, then we're going to put in this code in our template. If 5 is equal to 6, we'll put in this p tag, and then else we'll do slow math. So in our case, slow maths will be the HTML given back. Another cool thing is a for loop. So it looks just like a Python for loop, except there's no colons. And like I said, there's a curly brace, %, and then an end for. And in this case, we're just going to create a num p tag. And this is just another variable like we learned on the last slide. Some other ones we'll be seeing today, CRSF token. I won't get into it right now. This is kind of important though. Just know it exists. And another cool one, URL. So if we want to dynamically generate a URL, we don't have to like type in like http://google.com/. We can actually use this tag to sort of dynamically generate that. So we'll just give it some URL right here. And then if we want to pass in endpoints like /info/team, we can use some arguments at the end to do that as well. Okay, that is tags. Last is comments. So if you want to comment your code, this is a multi-line comment. Notice it's just like a tag, but it's labeled comment. So this will not be rendered in your HTML. And finally, we have this single line comment. So if you just need a single liner comment, it's like that. And there's a lot of fun things you could do with templating. I put the link here to some the Django docs for templating. So if you want to look into that later and see what other cool things they offer, that's there. And before going, you're probably looking at this whole time being like, okay, so Jody, you showed us like, for example, this variable slide, but these variables, like where are they coming from? Where are these coming from? Where are these values? You're not defining these anywhere. This is, going to throw an error, isn't it? And you're absolutely right. I didn't define these. And the answer is I don't define them in the index HTML file, so we don't do it here. We want to do it in views. So if this is a simple HTML file, it just has a title that we want to use. Our views is going to render this index.html, but we can also use this view to pass in this value. So the way we do that is we take whatever variable, in this case title, we're going to put it in a dictionary. I'm going to name this dictionary context for clarity. Let's see, title, right? So we just put this variable in this dictionary, gave it a value, and then we're going to pass it in as a third parameter to this render function right here. So we totally hid this from you last time. We didn't say there's like a third context variable. It is. It's right here. You just stick it in right here. So recall context, just take the variable, put it inside of a dictionary, pass the dictionary in as a third parameter to this render function, and your HTML file will now have access to all of these variables, which is pretty cool. All right, so let us actually do this in our code now. All right, so let me pull up VS Code. This is a good time for me to also start split screening, so I'm going to split screen this. Okay. All right. And let us do this. So in my, let's make the index page first. All right, so in this index page, I'll navigate to the index page so we can just take a look at it. Cool beans. All right, so in our index page, let us think of some context that we want to pass in. I'm just pulling up my sample code so I know what I'm doing. Okay. All right, so for example, I can probably do something like let's put in a name. We'll say like me, right? My age is 20, and I'm giving you a pitch on Bruin Rock, right? So this is still a Bruin Rock example, and oh, I don't want to put this in yet. Let's say my pitch is like join hack. So I love hack. So if we refresh this, we'll see that that pops up, but this is hard coded. So let's put this in through context. So I'm going to go to my views.py file. Let me find it. Settings, views, views.py. So I'm going to create a context dictionary that has a name. Let's say Jody. It has an age. I am 20. And then let's say my pitch is join hack. And recall, in order to access this, I must put it in the third parameter. All right. So it looks like it worked, but it's actually hard coded. Like if I change this to like Tim, this doesn't show anything. That's because this is still hard coded. So in our index.html file, we're going to go and replace some of these. So we'll just replace this with name. We'll replace age with age, and then pitch right here. Okay. So now, hey, look, it worked. You got Tim, age 20. He's not actually 20. He's a little older, but yeah. And then the pitch we passed in. All right, that's pretty cool. And also, I talked about a comment earlier. Let's try to put a comment in here just for the sake of this. So comment like this. Oh, why did you get rid of my curly brackets? Okay, we're just gonna start up. Comment. And then let's say this will not be rendered. End comment. This. If I refresh this page, nothing shows up. And then single line comment, this also will not show up. So if I refresh that, there's also nothing there. And if you're looking at this and going, ooh, why doesn't it show up like a normal comment in VS Code? Like it's not grayed out and all italicized. That's just because I'm in an HTML file. So VS Code is doing text highlighting. So turning only the HTML stuff. It's only text highlighting the HTML stuff. And this Django templating is not really recognized as like working code, but just know that it does work. All right. So we passed in a few, simple things, but let's try passing like a list, for example. Let's say I have a lot of flyer people today. Let's say the people flyering are Tim, me, and Narnar, our lovely directors. All right, so it's an array. So what's going to happen? Let's just put this, let's say, let's just put this in a p tag and see what happens. So flyer people, just like this. All right, so what's going to happen? It's a list, but we're putting it in a p tag. And we refresh. Oh, hey, look, it's really just a list. That's pretty cool. This is kind of not that nice though, so I'm going to change this and use a for loop to render this instead. So let's just put this in a little section called h1 people flyering today. Cool. And then let us make an unordered list of this. So when an unordered list is just bullet points. So I'm going to make a for loop. So for person in flyer people, I'm going to make a list item. We'll just call this person. And then I'm going to end for, very important to type the closing tag. Okay, so if I refresh this now, we say, oh, look, that's really cool. We got a bullet pointed list of the flyer people. And that's just made through this for loop, just like this. I'm going to, let me get rid of this list over here. We don't really need it anymore. All right. Okay, so we got this list, but let's add an if statement. So right now I have 3 people flyering today in flyer people. So if I go back to views.py, flyer people has, some people in it. But what if there's no one in it? So maybe there's no one flyering today. So I'm going to pass in an empty list. Like what's going to happen in that case? Well, if there's no people, then there's just going to be no one showing up. But this is kind of, bad user experience. You can't really, there's like no message here. So let's actually put an if statement. We're going to check if there's flyer people before rendering this list. So I'm going to say if flyer people, and recall from Python that this just results to true if the list is not empty. If flyer people is true, we're going to do that. Else, we're going to put a p tag that says no one. Thank God. And also very importantly, a end if. End if. All right, so let me just show that code in full real quick. If there's people flyering, we're going to run this for loop. Else, we're going to put a p tag instead that says no one, thank God, and then end if. All right, so if I go and refresh this page, people flying today, no one. Thank God. Nowadays, it's just kind of sad because there's no one flying and we kind of miss it. But at the time, you would probably say that. Okay, so let me uncomment this array. So we're going to put people back on Bruinwalk today. I want to add another thing. So if let's see, a few things we can add. I'm pretty sure I had a pitch for each person. I'm just going to give them the same generic pitch I passed in earlier. So they're all going to say join hack because y'all should join hack. And then I also before had like a link. I was able to click their name and go to the flyer info page. So I'm going to wrap this in an anchor tag. So this a tag, and this is going to let us link their name just like this. And I could set the link to be like a hard-coded link. So I could like copy pasta this link and put in like a 1. This would work totally fine. However, like I said, this might be different for you. Mine says 127.0.0.1. On your machine, it might be like localhost. When we launch this into production, this might also change. So we kind of want a way to dynamically do this instead in case like names start changing. So if you recall, there's a special URL tag that we can use. So I'm going to use it right now. So first it's going to take in a URL, just any URL. So I could also hard code, but I'm going to do this instead. Flyer info. Where am I getting this from? If you recall, way back at the beginning, I said in urls.py, we were like naming some of our paths. So let's just open that real quick. We named our path flyer info, and we stored it under this name flyer. So we can actually access this. So if I say flyer, I'll show you one more time. Flyer info. What this really does is it says Django, the URL we're going to put in is just this path. So it'll be whatever the base URL is /flyer, because that is where all of these URL patterns in our flyer app start off as /info, or not, there's no info anymore. It's just a number. So it's going to be looking for a number in our case, right? So it's flyer. We got flyer because the app name is flyer, as right here, flyer. And then also flyer info is just the name, flyer info right there, flyer info right here. All right, and I'm going to pass in an argument. I'm going to put in any random number. I'm going to put 1, 2, 3. You can put whatever number you want. So if I refresh this page and I click it, you can see that let me make this a little bigger. The URL it navigated to is flyer123. So pretty cool, right? We can dynamically generate the URL and pass in one of the arguments. And this argument just helped build the path. Okay, so that's pretty cool. While we're on this page, this flyer info, person info page is quite empty. Let's also just do some templating just as a practice and review. So in flyer info.html, so this is the flyer info page, I'm going to pass in some stuff as well. So let's see. It will include basically the same information. We'll have a name of a person. We'll also put their pitch. So p tag with pitch. And then we'll also have how many flyers they've given. So flyers given, we'll just say flyers given. Cool. If I render this right now, nothing's going to show up because we didn't give any of these values. So we have to go into views.py where we render this page, right? Flyer info. I have to pass it in as context. So context, say name is equal to nar. The pitch they give, the pitch they give is save the bees. It's just a common thing many people heard on Bruin Walk last year. And then the number of flyers they've given, so flyers given. Let's say they've been pretty successful today. They've given 11. Right, so I'm going to save that. If everything matches, then we will see this. Oh, and it didn't work because I forgot to pass in the context. So context here. And there we go. Nar, save the bees. Flyers given 11. Yeah, so that is the flyer info page. And so if I go to any one of the people on the list, it'll just link to that page. Okay, that was a lot, but that is basically it for this first half of the workshop on templating. So if there's any questions, let me know. I didn't see any questions in the chat, but if you still have them, let me know. Okay, so today's break time, let's see, come back at 7:12. Let's do a nice 10-minute break. 7:12 p.m. PT. And yes, we will see you in a little bit.
Sweet. All right, so we are back. So I'm going to be going over the second half of the workshop, which has to do mostly with databases and how to kind of integrate a database into our demo project. Okay, so just to get some stuff out of the way, what is a database, right? It is effectively a collection of structured information. How structured will usually depend on what kind of database you're using. For us, it's going to be pretty structured since we'll be using Sqlite, but there are other ones that work differently. A lot of times these databases are stored on a hard disk or some kind of persistent storage, as opposed to RAM, which is a kind of temporary storage. So why use a database at all? Like we've seen, we can store a lot of stuff just kind of in our RAM or main memory just by making variables. There's a lot of advantages to using a database, especially for an application that you are putting in production or planning to. Here are just a few. Ones I'll highlight. Data persistence is kind of the big one. You also have these databases are designed to query data, so you don't actually have to do that yourself, which is usually a lot more efficient. And then scalability is also a big one because these databases are designed to store data. So you don't really have to worry about too much of the implementation, which is really nice. So as I mentioned before, Django actually comes with Sqlite. So we actually don't have to do any database installation. We can just use it out of the box. So Sqlite is one of many databases. A note about Sqlite is it is a relational database, which pretty much means that the database can be represented as a collection of tables, and we use, in this case, we use SQL, which is kind of just a query language to find things in the database or manipulate it. A nice thing that we're going to go over a little bit is that we won't really have to touch SQL because Django provides a nice little wrapper for us. So in this image below, you can kind of see that like a few words that we might use is a field, which is effectively just the name of a column. So like name is a field, pitch is a field, flyers given is a field. ID is also a field. We'll go over this a little bit later, but this one is usually added automatically. And then there's like a record, which is just like an entry in the table, like a row. So Django gives us a sort of interface to our database that is a little bit more easy to use with than maybe just writing a SQL query. And to use it, we end up subclassing this model object that Django gives us to represent a specific kind of data that we want to store in a table. So our example that we'll have, or our model will be a flyer person, which will look kind of like this. And then in our subclass, we will make a variable for each kind of piece of data we'll want. And we'll go over kind of how that works in the demo. So a little bit more information about kind of the subclass that we create. So it's kind of simple. You just make a subclass, you name it whatever you want. And for each kind of field, you just make a variable and you put whatever name you want the field to be, and then you set it equal to, and then it'll be models dot some type of field. The type will depend on what type of data you're storing. So it might be a float or an integer or a string, etc. There's a lot of different ones. In this table, I highlighted a few that are common. So yes. So when we do kind of create this database, a lot of times, and even right at the beginning, we're going to be constantly making changes to it. And the way we do this is using a structure called a database migration. And what that is a kind of unit of change for our database. So if we wanted to maybe take a table and add a field, a new field, we could use a database migration to do this. Maybe we wanted to create a whole new table. That's another thing we could use a database migration to do. Django gives us an interface to do this, and we're going to have to use it. So the two main things for doing a database migration for kind of either creating a table or changing a table is we have to do this make migrations. So after changing or creating a new model, you do this make migrations command, and then the name of whatever app the model is in. And that will create a kind of migration like object. And after you do that, you'll use this migrate command, and that will actually run the migration and like go into the SQL database and change the correct tables. So this is a really nice sort of way of doing this. One of the big motivations is that if you need to change a database that has important data in it, these migrations help us modify the table without destroying any data on accident. Because if you have a production app, that can be very, very costly, accidentally destroying data. All right. So we're going to go ahead and kind of put some of these things into application. So we'll go ahead and move to our demo. So this is kind of where Jody left off. So you can see that, like, for example, if we look in templates, like this is, this is actually different than I thought it would be. Hold on. This is actually a little bit already what we want, but I'll go over it anyways. Let me just make sure that, interesting. Yeah, but this is about what Jody left off with. And I'll walk through kind of how to take this and then add the database into it. So the first thing we want to do is if we're adding a sort of database, we want to define what our model looks like. So we do this in this models.py file. So under in our Flyer app, there should be this models.py file. And this is where our subclasses will go. So you can see that models, let me make this a little bit bigger. Models is already imported for us. So we can just say, okay, class, and we'll call it flyer person. And then we subclass it using models with the plural dot model. And what this like model object gives us is pretty much all of the database stuff. This is like, okay, a flyer person can do anything like a generic database like object can do. And then the things that we're going to add are specifically like what data we want to store. So for a flyer person, they have a name. And I'm going to say models.char field because it's a string. Inside of char field, I'm going to give it a max length. And I'm just going to say, it can be, I'll say 255. Then they have a pitch. Now, a pitch is kind of interesting because it could be slightly longer than a name. So I'm actually going to make it a text field. I kind of just wanted to use this to disambiguate between these two. A char field usually has a fixed maximum length, and it is meant for smaller strings. A text field, you don't specify a maximum length, although like in the background, it does have one that's pretty large. And you use it for longer strings, maybe something that's longer than a name, like a pitch. And the last thing we'll say is flyers given. And we will make that an integer. So we say models.integer field. And then this one we will just do here. Alrighty. So this is just about what we want with our table. It's pretty simple, so that's really good. So now the one thing you're going to ask is, okay, so we made this model. How do we tell if anything worked? You know, what I want to kind of be able to do is have some way of looking at this database that we're making. And one way of doing that is if you remember, there's actually an admin page that's built into our Django app. So if you were ever wondering, if we go to this URLs page here, what is this, right? This is actually something, a special path that we can use to take a peek into many parts of our website, but specifically the database configuration. And so that's what we want to do. One thing we have to do though, in order to use this admin site, we have to create a thing called a super user. And that is just an account that can log into this admin page. How we do that is using two commands. So the first one won't make quite as much sense. So I'll explain why we have to run it. Let me just make sure I'm in the correct folder. I'm not. Okay. Oh wait, no. I think. Yeah. Okay. We do Python 3 manage.py, and then we'll say migrate. And what this command does is, it's actually one of the ones I explained in the slides, but it runs any database migrations. So just to kind of make this clear, let me do run server first. Because we had this error message, remember? It says, oh, you have 18 unapplied migrations. Your project may not work properly until you apply the migrations for admin, auth, content types, etc. So we want our admin page to work properly. That's why we're applying these migrations. So we just say, instead of run server here, we'll say migrate. And I'll do all of this stuff. And we should be good to create a super user. So we can say Python manage.py and then create, all one word, all lowercase, create super user. And then it's going to ask you for some like information like a username and kind of all that. So you just fill this in. I'm not going to put in an email address and then a password. Just make it whatever. It will shame you if you put a weak password in. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so we created our super user. So let's try running the server and going to our admin page. Oh wait, this is the main page that we didn't put a view for. Okay, so you get this sort of login thing. You can just enter the login that you created for your super user. And then it brings you to this page. And you'll notice something is this looks pretty empty. I would expect to see kind of something that like about my database table here, but there isn't. So the reason for this is because while we ran the initial migrations, we never actually created a migration for our new model. So it's not actually in the database yet. So what we have to do is go back to our code or our command line, stop the server and say Python 3 manage.py make migrations. And then Flyer, which is the app that we want to make it for. So this will look at Flyer, it'll look at the models and say, ooh, that's interesting. You have a new model. Let me create a table for that. And it'll tell SQL to create a table. So this looks like it succeeded. We ended up creating the Flyer person model. So that's great. Then we have to run the migration. So we say Python 3 manage.py and then migrate. And then it did another migration. So that sounds great. So if we go back here, we would expect that the table is here, but I will spoil it for you. It won't be. Oh wait, we have to run our server. Silly me. It won't be. And this is because we created the table. It's in the database. I assure you it's in the database right now. But we actually have to do one more line of code to tell the admin page, hey, I have this model and I would like to register it with the admin page. And that means the admin page will know about this model and be able to display information about it. And how we do that is we go to this page here. So under your, like in your Flyer app, there'll be this admin.py. And you'll see a pretty much empty file. And then it gives this helpful message of register your models here. So I will do just that. Now, in order to register my model, I need to import it. So I want to say from dot import models, which will take all of these models in here and bring them into this file so I can be able to register them. And I register it by saying admin.site.register and then models, which I imported, .flyerperson. And then if I save this and then go back here, I should be able to refresh it. And we get our table here. This is kind of interesting too. So Django will try to like pluralize this and it changed it to flyer space persons. I find that kind of funny that it does that. A lot of like these like database like abstractions will do that. And I just thought it was kind of humorous. So if we click on this, it will just show us all of the 0 flyer people in our table, but it also gives us this option to add a flyer person. So if we do that, we can click on it and we can put in all of the stuff for our flyer person, right? So it gives us a field for name, for pitch, and for the number of flyers given. And we can add it using this page, which is very handy. So if I say something like, I don't know, a flyer person, I'll just call it Tim. I'll say his pitch is, I'll just save the B's. And then I'll just put this at 0 for now. I can click save, and then they'll say, oh, this flyer person was created successfully. So I'll make one more. I'll say Jody. I'll say her pitch is join hack. And then her flyers given will be, I don't know, 1. We hit save, and we notice that we have 2 objects now. So that's really nice. We finally have some stuff in our database. You can click on any one of them to see information about them. So great. So now that we finally have data in our database, we can go about grabbing this data from the database and using it in our app. So the first thing that we might want to do is in our views, instead of passing in some random context that like we just hard coded, we can pass in the like one of the objects from the database as context. So if we go back here and we go to our views file in our Flyer app, what we want to do is change this context to all of the objects from our database. And that's actually pretty easy. So we can say, first we have to, as usual, import our models. So I'm going to import it a slightly different way. So you can actually say from.models and then import the specific models that you want. So I'll say import flyer person. And this is nice because then you can, it's just like a little bit shorter, maybe, especially if you're importing a few models. And then you don't have to say model dot when you use it as well. Okay, so I'm going to have a line here and it's going to say flyer people. And what do I want flyer people to be? I want it to ask the database, hey, can you give me every flyer person in the database? And how we can do that is flyer person dot objects, oops, dot all. And this should set like this flyer people object to a list of our flyer person model. Great. So now we can replace this list with a list of our flyer people. And then I'm going to remove this because we don't need it anymore. So we're passing in our flyer people, and that is all we need to change, really. So we're not done yet, but let's see what our app looks like after that change. So we can go, I will politely ask the Zoom line. Okay, and then we can go to our flyer endpoint. So it looks kind of weird. Obviously, we intentionally got rid of this stuff, but here we have this like flyer person object 1 and flyer person object 2. And that's because what we had before was a string. So we just ended up displaying it, but now instead of a string, we're passing in an object. So we actually have to change our template a little bit in order to display the information we actually want. So let's go find our index template. And we can see that here, like it says for person and flyer people. So this is the thing with all of our flyer objects. And it just says person here. So instead, person is one of our is our model, right? So if we go back to our models, now it's one of these that has a name, it has a pitch, and it has flyers given. So here, instead of saying person, we can say person.name. And instead of pitch here, we can say, oh, I want to display this specific person's pitch. So we say person.pitch. So that's good. And then we can just remove this stuff that we don't need. So I'm going to comment where it says like the name and age. I'll just comment that out. So if we save this and refresh the page, we get this is what we want. So that's great. We get the name that we want for each person, and then we get their pitch. So one other thing I'm going to do is this one is hard-coded, right? And it doesn't really do what we want. So we can actually change that now. So like I said before, we get in our model, we have a name, a pitch, and flyers given. But from this like models.model, we get an ID for free. And every time we make a model, it automatically assigns it an ID, and it usually starts at 1. But the good thing about this is that now we have a way of uniquely identifying a flyer person. And we can use that number here to give it a path. So here we can say, instead we say person.id. So that's great. This won't actually, well, this will change something, I'll show you. So if we save it, and then now we click Tim here, it goes to 1 because it has the ID of 1. And if we click Jody, oh, Jody should go to 2. Let me really quickly see what's going on. They shouldn't have the same ID. I'm going to continue, and this is going to give us a bit of a more decipherable issue later if it continues to happen. But the idea here is that we want to go to a different page per person. Yeah, so we'll debug this. This will create a bigger problem later that is a little bit easier to decipher. And we can figure it out then. In the meantime, let's go find, so if you notice this page, if we go click on this, we want to actually display some useful information about the flyer person. So this file actually got changed prematurely. So before, this looked a little bit different, I think. So if you go back to our views for our flyer info page, you see that it gives it this context here. So what this used to look like and what yours should look like is actually this. This is what yours will look like. And no matter who I click on, like I click on Tim and it still says like Jody. And our objective here is to change that. So if we go to our views, and we can kind of just do the same thing we did for index. So instead of this hard-coded context, we're going to get something from the database. But we're actually going to get a specific object from the database. So instead of saying, hey, database, can you give me every object? We're going to say, hey, database, can you give me a specific object with a specific ID? So here I'm going to say person is equal to flyer person dot objects dot get. And then I'm going to say ID is equal to flyer ID. Oops. which is the thing we passed in. So we finally used that, which is pretty awesome. And here in this context, we're just going to give it a person. So we say person and then assign it to our person object here. This can be anything, by the way, too, as long as you refer to this as like whatever you name it in the template. Okay. So one thing that this will work, right? So if we go, oh wait, well this will revert us back to like, oh, let me run this. Something went wrong. Oh, I have an error. Import fly from Google. Let me fix this bug really quick. This is a bug I can't really just throw aside. 121. The URL stuff. Oh, do I have a bug in my? The Python stack traces are a little bit, a lot. Oh, can't import name flyer from. I think I misspelled an import. Yeah, wait, I think it's up there. Move this environment. Oh, that was auto imported. I think my VS Code decided it wanted to crash my program. Okay, so now it should work. Okay, so this obviously is now correctly broken because we need to change the template still, just like we did for index. So let's go do that. We can go to, let's see if I can hide this one quickly. Okay. And then we can go to our flyer info. And now we don't have name, pitch, or flyers given. We have our person object, which has a name and a pitch and flyers given. Okay. And if we do that, we get the correct behavior here. And we should be able to, oh, that is quite a bug. So it should be able to click on different ones and go to different places. I think there is a spot that I messed up though. Oh, yeah. Okay, so what's wrong right now is that I'm not rendering the page based off of, oh wait, no, that's fine. Just person, flyer ID. Odd. I'm running a little low on time, so I'll try to fix this bug later, but we should be able to complete the project even if it has this bug. The correct behavior is to go to a different person, though. But I'll continue for now. So one thing here, when we did our this, is that this could actually fail. What if I try to get a flyer person with an ID that doesn't exist in our table yet? So we can actually kind of mitigate that problem by just putting this into a try except statement. And we want to do that because this can fail and throw an exception. So we're going to accept and then this error of like flyer person does not exist. And if that happens, we will just raise this HTTP 404 error, which we have to import. So here it is up here. Let me give you some more space. And we'll just have this error have the string person doesn't exist. Okay. And then that will make it so putting in like a bad ID will give us a 404 page, which will look really ugly right now because we don't have, like, we didn't configure a correct 404 page. All right. So with that done, one thing we're going to want to do is have like a method of taking a flyer. So for that, we can go into like our flyer info page, right? And here, what we want to do is create like a button that just says like take flyer. And when that happens, it'll ask the database, hey, can you increase the amount of flyers given for this specific person? So I'm going to make kind of the front end of what that should look like. And we'll end up just using an HTML form, and we'll fill in some of the missing pieces later. And then we'll just put like the string take a flyer in here. Okay. And then one thing we have to include here is this CSRF token. This is just something you normally will include in an HTML form. It's a security thing. I would go more into it, but it's a little bit out of scope. So just remember, this is something you usually put here. CSRF means cross-site request forgery. It's like a type of cyber attack. And this is a way of mitigating or preventing it. Okay, so here's what the front end will look like after doing that. So if we do this, we'll have this take flyers button. But right now it doesn't actually do anything. So you'll notice that like this doesn't change. And the way we need that to change is we need to have some endpoint that we can kind of call to ask the database to update. So how we do that is we go to our views page, and we make a new endpoint here, and we'll call it take flyer. And like the other endpoint, it will take request and also take a flyer ID. And effectively, what we want to do here is for the flyer ID, we want to get that database object, and then we want to increment the flyers given count by 1. So getting the object is pretty easy. It's just these 4 lines here, exactly the same. Then incrementing it, we just say person.flyers given plus equals 1. After doing that, so we changed the model. We save this new version of the model to the database by saying person.save. And that does the increment. So that does the database operation correctly. So that's great. Now we need to do something like this, which we did in our flyer info page, but it's slightly different because take flyer, its purpose isn't really to render a page as much as to just do something with the database. So instead of rendering a new page for this view, we're actually going to redirect. We're going to redirect the user back to the same page. And we can do that with a bit of code here. It's just 1 line, but it's kind of long. So I'll explain this. So you say HTTP response redirect. And then in here, we'll say reverse, which also needs to be imported. Same thing with HTTP response redirect. And here we say flyer : flyer info. And I believe that's the name of this page. So we're redirecting to that page, this page up here. So the reverse function also takes this args, and this is a tuple with one element. So it's going to be a tuple with one element that has person.id in it. So what this does is it says, I want you to redirect to the flyers flyer info endpoint with the argument like the person.id. Make sure this comma is here if you're coding along. This comma is is what makes this a tuple. Otherwise, you'll get a type error. For HTTP response redirect and reverse, we want to import both of these. So VS Code was nice to me and auto imported this HTTP response redirect, but it's just from this guy right here. We also need to import reverse though. So that's from Django.base, I'm sorry, .urls.base import reverse. And that should get rid of this type error here. Okay, so if we do that, we're not quite done. So we made a new view, right? But we never put a URL in our URLs file that directs to this view. So that's kind of the connecting piece that we need to do. So we made this view, has all the functionality, and now we just need a URL that points to it. So if we go to our URLs file, we just add another one in here. I'm going to say, it's going to say int flyer ID, just like this one above it, but we're going to say slash take flyer. And this will go to views dot take flyer. This shouldn't be, I think. Let me just make sure that this is, odd. Okay, you should only have one views here. And then we're going to name this like the other one, and we're going to name it equals take flyer. Make sure you include a comma here too, since this is a list. Okay, so that's great. The last thing we need to do now is go back to our form that we had in our template and complete it. So then this will direct us to the correct URL, which will direct us to the correct view, and which should run our code. So here we add this action attribute, and effectively what this action attribute puts is the URL that we want to submit a special request to. So we can use our URL syntax from before. We say URL, it's flyer colon take flyer. And then we'll say person.id here. So this is similar to what we had before, how we like linked to the correct thing, or at least should have. So once you do that, we also include one more attribute. It's called method. And we just say that this equals post. This is just, I would go more into what like the difference between types of requests are, but normally our form action is a post request. It's like, yeah, I could go more effectively. A GET request will generally read information, and a post request generally will change or create data. So we are changing or creating data, so we use a post request. After that, this should actually work. So if we go back here, you see how it increments. So that's great. The weird thing, I guess our bug from before, where, oh, okay. The bug from before has fixed itself. Okay, but this is what it is. Yeah, so this is, we finally stored like the data, all the stuff in our database, and we were correctly able to retrieve that data and store it and change it using this button here. And so you'll notice that like both Tim and Jody have different numbers here. If we go and look in our admin page, we'll see that they're being changed in here as well. So now Tim has 11 instead of 0, and Jody should have, I think 6 is what we left her at. Oh, 5. Yeah. So now we know we're changing our database. That's actually all I got for databases. There's some more cool stuff you can do with databases. You can obviously like slap some CSS on this and make it pretty. But like this is kind of the framework of how to use Django with with a Sqlite. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask. But other than that, that is all the content I have prepared. Thanks. Oh yeah, feedback form too. I think here's the link for that. If someone wants to copy it in. Oh.